The sun rose over Dubai on November 14th, casting gold across the Persian Gulf, turning the glass towers along Sheikh Zayed Road into pillars of light. Inside the Burj Al Harama, on the 42nd floor, in a honeymoon suite that cost more per night than most people earned in a month, a young woman lay motionless on cool marble flooring. Her name was Araya Fengsri. She was 22 years old. She had been married for exactly 7 hours. Marcus Pemberton stood in the bathroom doorway, his reflection fractured across mirrors that stretched from floor to ceiling. His white dress shirt was untucked, sleeves rolled to the elbows. His phone trembled in his right hand. Behind him, the shower ran, steam billowing into the suite's main room where his bride lay perfectly still, one arm extended toward the bed as if reaching for something just out of grasp. Her wedding dress, an elegant ivory sheath with delicate lace sleeves, was twisted around her legs. One shoe remained on her left foot, the other rested near the balcony doors, as if kicked off in haste or struggle. Marcus's thumb hovered over the emergency call button. His breathing was shallow, controlled. Outside, the city woke slowly. Luxury cars threading through intersections, construction cranes rotating against the sky, the hum of ambition and excess rising with the heat. Inside the suite, there was only silence and the sound of running water and a British man trying to decide what truth looked like. 12 hours earlier, everything had been perfect. Araya Fengsri had never imagined getting married in Dubai. Growing up in Chiang Mai, in a small house near the Ping River where the air smelled like jasmine and fried garlic and the smoke from temple incense, she had dreamed of a traditional ceremony, her mother weaving flowers into her hair, monks chanting blessings at dawn, but life had taught her to adapt. At 15, she left school to work at her aunt's restaurant, saving every baht to send her younger sister to university. At 18, she trained herself to speak English by watching BBC documentaries, then Mandarin through phone apps during bus rides, then Japanese from tourists who needed directions. By 20, she was fluent in 4 languages and working the front desk at the Ananda Resort and Spa, one of Chiang Mai's most exclusive properties. She was good at her job, better than good. She remembered guests' names, their preferences, their anniversaries. She could diffuse complaints with a smile that was genuine because she actually cared whether people felt welcome. Within 2 years, she was promoted to executive assistant to the resort's general manager, coordinating VIP arrivals, managing special events, translating for international clients. She made decent money, not rich but stable, enough to keep her mother comfortable, to pay her sister's tuition, to save a little each month in an account she kept secret. Araya was careful, reserved. She'd watched too many girls from her village chase foreign men with promises of visas and better lives, only to end up isolated in countries where they couldn't speak the language, married to men who saw them as acquisitions rather than partners. She'd promised herself she'd be different. She'd build her own life first. Love, if it came, would be on her terms. Then Marcus Pemberton checked into the Ananda Resort for a 5-day business conference. He was British, 34, with the kind of easy charm that came from private schools and international business deals. He ran a consulting firm that helped European companies expand into Asian markets, or so his business card claimed. He was polite to staff, generous with tips, always said please and thank you. On his second day, he asked Araya to recommend a good restaurant for dinner. On his third day, he invited her to join him there. If she was free, no pressure, just conversation between 2 people who understood what it meant to work hard in the hospitality industry. She said no. Professionally kindly. Company policy. He smiled, nodded, said he understood completely, and asked if she'd at least help him book a private temple tour for his last day. She did. The tour guide later told her that Mr. Pemberton had asked questions about her the entire time. Where was she from? Was she single? Did she always work this hard? On Marcus's final morning, as he checked out, he left an envelope at the desk with her name on it. Inside was a handwritten note on resort stationery. It said he knew this was unconventional, but he couldn't leave Thailand without saying he genuinely enjoyed talking with her, even briefly, and if she was ever in London or anywhere he happened to be traveling, he'd love to buy her that dinner properly. His personal email was at the bottom. Araya kept the note in her desk drawer for 3 weeks before she wrote back. Their correspondence started cautiously. He asked about her day. She asked about his work. He sent photos from Singapore, from Kuala Lumpur, from business trips that seemed glamorous but, he confessed, were often lonely. She sent pictures of Chiang Mai at sunrise, the mountains wrapped in mist, the night markets glowing with lanterns. He asked if she'd ever thought about traveling more. She admitted she'd never left Thailand, couldn't afford it. Family obligations. He understood family obligations, he said. His parents had passed when he was young. He'd built everything himself. He knew what it meant to carry responsibility. 3 months into their messaging, he asked if he could visit Chiang Mai again. Not for business, just to see her. She hesitated. He didn't push. He said he'd be in Bangkok for meetings anyway, and Chiang Mai was just a short flight, but only if she wanted to, only if she felt comfortable. She said yes. That weekend, he took her to dinner at a restaurant she'd only ever walked past, the kind of place with white tablecloths and menus without prices. He asked about her family, her dreams, her fears. He listened in a way that felt rare, like her words actually mattered. He didn't talk about money or success or what he could offer her. He talked about loneliness, about how hard it was to meet genuine people when your life revolved around airports and conference rooms, about how surprised he was to feel something real for someone he'd only known through screens and a few brief conversations. When he dropped her home that night, he didn't try to kiss her. He just held her hand for a moment and said he'd like to see her again, if she'd let him. She let him. Over the next 2 months, Marcus visited Chiang Mai 3 more times. He met her mother, who was polite but watchful. He brought gifts, nothing extravagant, just thoughtful. A silk scarf for her mother, a leather journal for her sister who wanted to be a writer, books about London for Araya because he wanted her to see his world, to imagine herself there. He video called her every night when he was traveling. He sent flowers to her office on her birthday. He told her she was the most intelligent woman he'd ever met, that her ambition and resilience made her beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with appearance. He said he'd been with women who only wanted his money or status, but she wanted nothing from him except his time and honesty, and that was everything. Araya felt herself falling, not recklessly, not blindly, but falling nonetheless. When Marcus proposed, it was in a garden restaurant in Chiang Mai, 3 months after their first real date. He didn't get on one knee. He didn't make it a spectacle. He just took her hand across the table and said he knew it was fast, maybe too fast, but he also knew what he felt, and he didn't want to waste time pretending he wasn't completely certain about her. He wanted to build a life together. He wanted her to move to London eventually, but slowly at her pace. He wanted to marry her because she made him believe in partnership again. The ring was modest, white gold, single diamond, elegant without being ostentatious. She said yes, but a small voice inside her, the careful voice that had protected her for so long, whispered, "Wait. Ask questions. There's something you don't know." She ignored it. Her mother's concerns were gentle but persistent. This was too fast. They barely knew each other. What did Araya really know about his life in England, his past, his family? Araya insisted she was 22, not a child, and she'd been careful, and Marcus wasn't like other men. He respected her. He valued her mind. He saw her as an equal. Her mother said nothing more, just hugged her tightly and whispered a prayer in Thai that Araya didn't quite catch. They decided on a destination wedding. Marcus suggested Dubai, neutral ground, he said, between her world and his, luxury without pretense. They could invite close friends and family, keep it intimate, and honeymoon there before flying to London together. Araya agreed. It felt modern, independent, a way to start their marriage on equal footing, neither in his country nor hers. The planning took 8 weeks. Marcus handled most of it remotely, hiring a wedding coordinator, booking the Burj Al Harama, arranging flights for her mother and sister. Araya focused on her dress, simple and elegant, something her mother would approve of. She gave notice at the resort. Her manager was sad to lose her but congratulated her warmly. Everyone said she deserved happiness. 3 weeks before the wedding, Araya couldn't sleep. She told herself it was normal pre-wedding anxiety. But the careful voice was louder now. She opened her laptop at 2 in the morning and typed Marcus's full name into Google. She'd done this before, casually, when they first started talking. His LinkedIn profile showed an impressive career. His company website looked professional. There were a few mentions in trade publications about consulting contracts, but this time she kept scrolling. Page 3 of search results. Page 4. Then she found a blog post from 2 years earlier, written by a woman named Grace Reyes, a Filipino nurse living in London. The post was titled, "When Love is a Lie." It described meeting a British consultant named Marcus at a medical conference, a whirlwind romance, an engagement, discovering, 3 months later, that he was already married to someone else. Grace had gone to the police, but there was no crime in proposing to someone when you were married, only in actually going through with bigamy. Marcus had disappeared before it got that far, changed his phone number, deleted his social media. Araya's hands shook as she read. She searched deeper. Found a forum for women who'd been scammed by romance con artists. 3 different threads mentioned a British consultant who targeted Asian women in hospitality, promised marriage, extracted money or access to business connections, then vanished. The details varied, but the pattern was consistent. She told herself it couldn't be the same person. Marcus was real. She'd met him. He'd met her family. He was flying her mother and sister to Dubai. Why would a con artist go through all that effort? Unless the con was bigger than money, unless what he wanted was her residency status, her languages, her connections in Asian luxury hospitality markets, a wife who could open doors his British passport couldn't. She called her sister at 3 in the morning, whispered everything. Her sister said, cancel the wedding, walk away. Araya said she couldn't. Everyone had already booked flights. The deposits were paid. What if she was wrong? What if this was just coincidence, just her fears sabotaging her happiness? Her sister begged her to at least talk to Marcus, ask him directly. Araya said she would. After the wedding, when they were alone, when she could see his face and know for certain, the wedding day arrived with cloudless skies and temperatures that made the air shimmer. 20 guests gathered in a rooftop garden at the Burj Al Harama, the Persian Gulf spreading endless and blue beyond the glass barriers. Araya's mother wept quietly. Her sister held her hand. Marcus's friends from London, 4 men in expensive suits, drank champagne and made jokes Araya didn't quite understand. There was a woman standing near the hotel lobby during cocktail hour, watching the celebration from a distance. Araya noticed her because she looked out of place, dressed too casually, her expression hard. Their eyes met for a moment. The woman's gaze was searching, almost pleading, as if trying to communicate something urgent. Then hotel security approached her, asked if she was a guest, and she left. Araya's hand trembled when she signed the marriage certificate. Marcus noticed, leaned close, whispered if she was okay. She nodded, smiled, said she was perfect, just overwhelmed. Happy. The ceremony was beautiful. The food was extraordinary. The sunset turned the sky orange and pink. Marcus held her close during their first dance, told her he loved her, that she'd made him the luckiest man alive. She believed him, or wanted to, or needed to, because the alternative was too terrible. By midnight, most guests had left. Araya's mother and sister hugged her good night, said they'd see her for breakfast. Marcus's friends clapped him on the back, made inappropriate jokes about the wedding night, and stumbled toward the elevators. Marcus and Araya rode up to the 42nd floor in silence, his arm around her waist, her head against his shoulder. Inside the suite, he poured champagne. She said she needed to wash off her makeup, change out of her dress. He kissed her forehead, said take your time. He'd be waiting. She closed the bathroom door, stared at herself in the mirror. The bride looking back was a stranger. She heard his phone ring in the other room, heard him answer quietly, heard him step onto the balcony, sliding the door closed behind him. Araya opened her clutch. Inside was her phone, set to record. She'd started doing this 2 weeks ago, after finding Grace's blog, recording their conversations, building evidence, just in case. She pressed record, set the phone on the marble counter, and walked out to ask her husband who he really was. The call came through to Dubai police at 6:23 a.m. A British national, staying at the Burj Al Harama, reporting an emergency. His wife, unresponsive. He'd tried CPR, needed help immediately. The dispatcher noted the tremor in his voice, the way he kept repeating, please hurry, the sound of water running in the background. Paramedics arrived first, sweeping into the 42nd floor suite with equipment and urgency. They found Araya exactly where Marcus had described, lying on the marble floor between the bathroom and the bed. Her skin was cool to the touch, no pulse, no breathing. They began resuscitation protocols anyway because that's what training demanded, even when the body had already made its decision hours ago. Marcus stood against the wall, watching. His face was colorless. His hands shook. He answered their questions in fragments. She went to the bathroom. I heard a sound. I found her like this. I called right away. Please, please save her. Inspector Nazrin Rashid arrived 20 minutes later, called in because hotel deaths involving foreign nationals required certain protocols, especially in a property as high profile as the Burj Al Harama. She was 41, a 15-year veteran of Dubai police, specializing in cases involving expatriates and tourists. She'd seen everything. Suicides masked as accidents, accidents masked as suicides, murders staged to look like both. She stepped into the suite and felt the wrongness immediately. Not obvious, just a frequency slightly off, like a piano key tuned incorrectly that only trained ears could detect. The paramedics had stopped their efforts. One of them was filling out paperwork. The other was covering Araya's body with a hotel sheet, which Rashid immediately asked him to remove. She needed to see everything exactly as it had been found. The young paramedic apologized, stepped back. Rashid circled the body slowly. Araya's wedding dress was twisted around her legs, the fabric bunched near her knees as if she'd been turning, moving quickly. One shoe on, one shoe off. The shoe that was off lay near the balcony doors, a good 12 feet from where the body rested. People who fainted didn't kick off shoes mid-collapse. They dropped straight down. The inspector knelt beside Araya's left arm, the one extended toward the bed. She examined the wrist without touching it. Bruising dot fresh. Finger-shaped. 4 marks on the underside of the wrist, one on top. Pressure bruises. Someone had grabbed her. Hard Rashid stood, turned to Marcus. He was still against the wall, still shaking. She introduced herself calmly, said she needed to ask him some questions, just routine, to understand what happened. He nodded, said anything. Whatever she needed. She asked him to walk her through the evening. He did. The wedding bay dutiful, 20 guests. Reception on the rooftop. They came upstairs around midnight. Araya was tired. She wanted to wash off her makeup. He poured champagne. They were celebrating. She went into the bathroom. He heard a thud. Rushed in. Found her on the floor. Started CPR immediately. Called emergency services. Rashid asked what time he'd found her. He said maybe 1 a.m. Maybe a little after. He wasn't sure. Everything happened so fast. She asked if Araya had been feeling ill earlier. He said no. She'd seemed fine. Happy, maybe a little quiet, but it was an emotional day. She asked if Araya had any medical conditions he knew about. Allergies. Heart problems. Epilepsy. He said no, nothing. She was healthy, young. This didn't make sense. Rashid walked to the bathroom. The shower was still running, steam thick in the air. She turned it off. Scanned the counters, makeup scattered. A clutch purse, open. Araya's phone inside. She made a mental note. On the counter near the sink, 2 champagne glasses. Both had been used. One was empty, just residue at the bottom. The other was half full, lipstick marks on the rim. She returned to the main room. Asked Marcus if he'd been drinking. He said 1 glass of champagne, maybe 2. He wasn't drunk. He was coherent. He'd been trying to save his wife. Rashid asked if anyone else had been in the room. He said no, just them. It was their wedding night. She asked if they'd argued. His reaction was immediate. No, absolutely not. They were happy. They'd just gotten married. Why would they argue? She said she had to ask. People argued sometimes, even on happy occasions. Stress, alcohol, fatigue. It happened. She wasn't accusing anyone, just needed to understand. Marcus said there was nothing to understand. His wife collapsed. Maybe it was an aneurysm, a stroke, something sudden. Young people had strokes sometimes, didn't they? Undiagnosed conditions. Please, couldn't they just figure out what happened? Rashid said they would. She asked for his phone, his passport, his laptop, standard procedure for any unexplained death. He hesitated only briefly, then handed everything over. His phone was unlocked. His passport was British, issued 3 years ago. His laptop was in a bag near the desk. She asked if he'd touched anything in the room after finding Araya. He said just her, doing CPR. And he grabbed his phone to call for help. That was all. Rashid requested a forensic team. Hotel management was already anxious, hovering in the hallway, worried about reputation and publicity. She told them this was a potential medical emergency, possibly natural causes, but she needed to be thorough. They understood, or pretended to. Marcus was allowed to go to another room in the hotel, accompanied by an officer. He wasn't under arrest, just separated from the scene. He went without protest, looking back once at the sheet-covered shape on the floor, his face crumbling. The forensic team arrived within an hour. They photographed everything, collected the champagne glasses, swabbed surfaces, documented the bruising on Araya's wrists, the position of her body, the scattered shoe. They bagged her clutch, her phone, her jewelry. They noted everything and said nothing because speculation wasn't their job. Evidence was. Araya's body was transported to the medical examiner's office. Rashid accompanied it, watching as Araya was transferred from hotel sheet to examination table, her wedding dress carefully removed and catalogued. The ME, Dr. Khalil, a man who'd performed thousands of autopsies and had learned to see death as a puzzle rather than a tragedy, began his external examination. No obvious trauma to the head, no fractures. The bruising on the wrists was noted, photographed, measured. He estimated it occurred within the last 6 to 8 hours, consistent with the timeline Marcus provided. But wrist bruises didn't kill people. Dr. Khalil opened Araya's eyes, examined her pupils, noted petechial hemorrhaging, small red dots in the whites of her eyes. It could mean several things: strangulation, suffocation, severe coughing, high blood pressure. Not definitive alone, but combined with everything else, it added to the picture. He told Rashid full autopsy would take several hours. Toxicology would take longer, 72 hours minimum. But his preliminary assessment was that Araya hadn't died from a fall or seizure or a sudden cardiac event. There were signs her body had been deprived of oxygen. How and why, he couldn't say yet. Rashid returned to her office and began the deeper work. She started with Marcus Pemberton's phone. His messages with Araya showed a 6-month relationship, exactly as he'd described. Sweet exchanges, photos, plans, I love yous. Nothing suspicious on the surface. But his messages with other contacts revealed complications. A conversation with someone named David from 2 weeks ago. You really going through with this one? Marcus's reply. Already done, mate. Just the ceremony left. David, hope she's worth it. Marcus, she will be. It could mean anything or nothing. Men talked about marriage in crude ways sometimes. Rashid checked Marcus's call log, dozens of calls to UK numbers, several to Thailand, but one number appeared repeatedly, including a 30-minute call at 11:47 p.m. on the wedding night. The timestamp bothered her. Marcus had said they returned to the suite around midnight, so he'd been on the phone right before, or maybe during their return. He'd stepped onto the balcony during that call, based on what the hotel's keycard logs showed. The balcony door opened at 11:51 p.m. She traced the number, registered to a mobile carrier in London. No name attached without a warrant, which she began the paperwork for immediately. While waiting, she opened Marcus's laptop. It required a password. The tech team would crack it, but that took time. Instead, she shifted to researching Marcus himself. His company, Pemberton Consulting Solutions, had a professional website but little actual presence. The business registration was legitimate, filed in London 18 months ago, but there were no client testimonials, no case studies, no real proof of work. She searched his name in quotations. Marcus Pemberton. Pages of results. A LinkedIn profile showing an impressive career arc. Mentions in a few business articles. But something felt thin, like a stage set built to be photographed from one angle. Then she found Grace Reyes's blog. It was dated 2 years earlier. A woman in London describing a romance with a British consultant named Marcus. An engagement. The discovery of deception. Grace hadn't named him fully in the post, just used Marcus P. But the details aligned too perfectly. British consultant, worked in Asian markets, proposed quickly, vanished when confronted. Rashid searched for Grace Reyes, found her on social media, sent a message explaining who she was, that she needed to speak urgently about Marcus Pemberton. It was early morning in London. She didn't expect a fast response. Grace replied in under 10 minutes. The call that followed lasted an hour. Grace's voice was steady but edged with old anger. She told Rashid everything. Meeting Marcus at a medical conference, the whirlwind courtship, his promises, discovering by accident that he was still married to a woman in Manchester, confronting him, his denials, then his disappearance. She'd gone to police, but there was no crime in lying about your marital status unless you actually committed bigamy. She'd moved on with her life but never forgotten. Rashid asked if Grace knew anything about Marcus's current status, his patterns, his methods. Grace said she'd spent months after their breakup trying to understand what had happened, and she'd found others, women online. Different forums, different names, but the same story. A consultant who targeted women in hospitality, women from Southeast Asia, women who were vulnerable in specific ways. He didn't steal money outright. He married them, or got engaged, extracted what he needed, access or connections or credibility, then moved on. Grace said she'd tried to warn people. She'd posted on forums, reached out to women she suspected were next, but it was hard to prove, and Marcus was careful. He changed phone numbers, adjusted his approach, never quite crossed into obvious criminality. Rashid asked if Grace had ever known Marcus to be violent. Grace paused, said no, but she'd sensed something underneath his charm, a coldness when things didn't go his way, a quickness to anger that he controlled carefully. She'd felt afraid of him exactly once, the night she confronted him about his wife. The way he looked at her, like she was a problem to solve rather than a person. She'd made sure they met in public after that. After the call, Rashid sat in her office watching the sun climb over Dubai's skyline. She had pieces but not a picture. A man with a pattern of deception, a dead bride with bruises and oxygen deprivation, a timeline with gaps. A phone call that lasted 30 minutes right before the couple entered their suite. She needed the toxicology results. She needed Marcus's laptop unlocked. And she needed to know what Araya had been thinking in the days and hours before she died. Her team found the answer in Araya's belongings. Her suitcase, packed neatly for the honeymoon and the eventual move to London, contained normal things: clothes, toiletries, a notebook written in Thai. But hidden inside a makeup case, beneath false eyelashes and concealer, was a small external hard drive. Rashid connected it to her computer. Inside were folders, screenshots, saved web pages, Grace's blog post, forum threads about romance scammers, background check attempts on Marcus. Research on UK immigration law, particularly regarding spouse visas, articles about domestic violence warning signs, a document titled Evidence, dated 3 weeks before the wedding. Araya had known, or suspected. She'd been investigating her own fiancé. The document was meticulous. Dates and times of conversations, inconsistencies in Marcus's stories, questions she'd asked him and his answers. Notes like, said his company was founded in 2019, but registration shows 2022 and claims he studied at Oxford but no record found, and told me his parents died in car accident when he was 20, later said 25. The final entry, dated 2 days before the wedding. I think he's using me to access Thai luxury hotel networks. His consulting business is fake. But I don't know how to stop this without humiliating my family. Everyone is already here. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm paranoid. I'll ask him after the ceremony. If he can explain, I'll know I was just afraid. If he can't, I'll know what to do. Rashid felt the weight of that decision, the paralysis of social pressure and self-doubt. Araya had been smart enough to see the danger but too trapped by circumstance to escape it cleanly. The toxicology report arrived on day 3. Dr. Khalil called Rashid directly. Araya's blood showed elevated levels of lorazepam, a prescription sedative not a fatal dose, but significant, enough to cause dizziness, confusion, impaired coordination. Araya had no prescription for lorazepam, Marcus did. A bottle had been found in his toiletries bag, prescribed by a London doctor 2 months earlier for anxiety and sleep issues. Combined with the champagne, the sedative would have made Araya vulnerable, unsteady, easy to overpower. The ME's final assessment cause of death was asphyxiation, likely due to manual strangulation or smothering. The petechial hemorrhaging, the lack of other trauma, the timeline, all supported this conclusion. The wrist bruises indicated struggle. The sedatives indicated premeditation, or at least opportunity. Rashid had enough to arrest Marcus Pemberton on suspicion of murder. She brought him in formally. Read him his rights. He maintained his innocence, his shock, his grief. His lawyer, flown in from London, argued there was no direct evidence, only circumstantial connections. The sedatives were prescribed for Marcus's own use. The champagne was celebratory. The bruises could have occurred during CPR. People panicked, grabbed arms, tried to help. The asphyxiation could have been a medical event, a seizure that blocked her airway. But Rashid had one more piece. She'd obtained the warrant for Marcus's phone records and found the 11:47 p.m. call was to his friend David. The same David who'd texted asking if Marcus was going through with this one. Rashid called David in London, identified herself, asked what he and Marcus had discussed that night. David hesitated, then said Marcus had called sounding stressed, said his bride had found something, knew something, and was going to confront him. Marcus was trying to figure out how to handle it. David had told him to just come clean or cancel everything and leave. Marcus had said it was too late for that. That call ended at 12:70 a.m. Marcus returned to the suite at 12:19, according to hotel elevator logs. Araya was dead by 1:03 a.m., based on the best estimates. Inspector Rashid requested a full search of the suite again. This time, they found Araya's phone, the one from the clutch in the bathroom. It had been turned off, but forensics powered it up carefully, preserved its contents. Inside was a voice recording app, multiple files. The most recent was time-stamped 12:47 a.m. on November 14th. The wedding night, Rashid listened to it once, alone in her office, headphones on. Then she listened again, taking notes. Then a third time, because she needed to be certain of what she was hearing. Araya's voice, quiet but clear. Marcus, I need to ask you something. I need you to be honest with me. Marcus's voice, cautious. Of course. What is it? Araya, I know about Grace. I know about the others. I've been looking into your past, and I found things that don't make sense. Your business, your story. I think you've been lying to me. Silence. Then Marcus. Calm. Where is this coming from? We just got married. Why are you doing this now? Araya? Because I was afraid. I didn't want to believe it. But I can't start a marriage on lies. I need you to explain. Tell me I'm wrong. Please, Marcus, you've been spying on me. Going through my things, listening to gossip from people who don't know me. And now you want to accuse me on our wedding night. Araya, I'm not accusing. I'm asking. If you have explanations, I'll listen. But I need the truth. Marcus, the truth is, you're ruining everything. We could have been happy. I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me. Araya, you haven't given me anything. You've been using me. I want to know why. Sounds of movement. Marcus's voice, harder. You're going to have to make a choice, darling. You can forget this paranoia and be my wife. Or you can walk away and embarrass both of us. But you don't get to interrogate me like I'm some criminal. Araya, I'm not walking away. I'm calling this off. The marriage. I'll annul it. I'll tell everyone the truth. More movement. Faster. Araya's breathing changes, becomes sharp. Marcus, let go of me. Stop. You're hurting me. Marcus, you're not going anywhere. You're not saying anything. You understand me? A crash, something falling. Araya's voice, desperate, please, Marcus, please. Fabric rustling. Heavy breathing. Then water running. Araya's voice again, weaker. I can't breathe. Silence. Long silence. Long silence. Water still running. Then Marcus's voice, quiet, almost to himself. Bloody hell. All right. All right. Think. The recording continued for another 11 minutes. Water turning off. Movement. Marcus's breathing. The sound of him pacing, muttering, trying to figure out what to do with his dead wife. The recording stopped at 1003 a.m. Inspector Rashid sat in silence after it ended. Then she picked up her phone and called the prosecutor's office. She had everything she needed. Marcus Pemberton was formally arrested on November 17th, 3 days after his wedding night. He sat in an interrogation room at Dubai Police Headquarters, his lawyer beside him, his hands folded on the metal table. He looked smaller than he had in the hotel suite, diminished by fluorescent lighting and the particular quality of silence that comes from knowing you've been caught. Inspector Rashid placed Araya's phone on the table between them. She didn't say anything at first. Just let Marcus look at it. The screen was dark, but he understood what it represented. She could see the recognition in his eyes, the way his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She pressed play. Araya's voice filled the room. Marcus, I need to ask you something. I need you to be honest with me. Marcus's lawyer tried to interrupt, citing consent laws, inadmissibility, privacy violations. Rashid let him talk. Dubai had specific regulations regarding recorded evidence, and the admissibility would be determined by prosecutors and eventually judges. But for this moment, in this room, she wanted Marcus to hear what she'd heard. She wanted him to know that his wife's final act had been to trap him with his own words. The recording played in full, 4 minutes and 16 seconds of a marriage dissolving into violence. When it ended, the silence in the interrogation room felt heavier than before. Marcus's lawyer spoke first. His client maintained his innocence. The recording proved nothing definitive. There were sounds of struggle, yes, but that could be explained as Marcus trying to restrain a spouse who'd become erratic, possibly due to intoxication or medication. The sedatives in Araya's system suggested she may have taken them herself, become disoriented, and lashed out. Marcus had been defending himself. The tragedy was that in the chaos, Araya had somehow stopped breathing. An accident. A terrible accident compounded by panic. Rashid asked Marcus directly if that was his version. He nodded. Said he'd loved Araya, said he'd been trying to calm her down when she attacked him, said he'd never meant for any of this to happen. She asked about Grace Reyes, about the other women, about the pattern of deception and manipulation that Araya had uncovered. Marcus said those were past relationships that had ended badly, exaggerated by bitter ex-partners who couldn't accept that things hadn't worked out. He'd never lied about being a consultant. His business was legitimate. People broke up. It happened. That didn't make him a murderer. Rashid said the evidence suggested otherwise. The premeditation of drugging Araya's champagne. The timeline of the phone call with David where Marcus admitted his bride had discovered something and needed to be handled. The recording capturing his threats, her pleas, the sounds of her dying while he stood there calculating his next move. Marcus's lawyer said this was speculation. The prosecution would have to prove intent beyond reasonable doubt. That would be difficult with circumstantial evidence and a recording that could be interpreted multiple ways. He was right. It would be difficult. But Rashid had worked difficult cases before. The news broke internationally within hours. British man arrested for murder of Thai bride in Dubai, luxury hotel. The story had everything media outlets craved. Wealth, beauty, a wedding, a death. The photographs of Araya in her wedding dress, smiling at a camera just hours before she died, were published across every major outlet. Marcus's photo beside hers, his expression carefully neutral in his booking image. Araya's family arrived from Thailand for the second time. Her mother and sister had come for a wedding and stayed for a funeral. Now they returned for a trial. Rashid met with them in a private room at the police station, explained what the investigation had uncovered, what the recording contained. Araya's sister listened without crying, her face set hard. Her mother wept quietly, holding a photograph of Araya as a child, maybe 7 years old, smiling gap-toothed at the camera. Through a translator, Araya's mother asked if her daughter had been afraid at the end. Rashid considered lying, offering comfort. But she'd learned that families deserve truth more than comfort. She said yes, Araya had been afraid, but she'd also been brave. She'd documented everything. She'd tried to protect herself and potentially other women. She'd faced a dangerous man and demanded honesty even when it cost her everything. The sister asked if they could listen to the recording. Rashid said she wouldn't recommend it. Some things, once heard, couldn't be unheard. The sister insisted. So Rashid played it, and the two women listened to Araya's final minutes. And when it ended, the mother stood and walked out of the room without speaking. The sister stayed. She asked Rashid to make sure Marcus never left prison. To make sure everyone knew what he'd done, Rashid promised to try. The trial began 4 months later, in April, as Dubai's heat climbed toward summer's brutality. The courthouse was modern glass and marble, air-conditioned to Arctic temperatures, filled with international journalists and legal observers. Cases involving foreign nationals always drew attention, but this one had become something larger. A symbol of violence against women, of predatory men who crossed borders to exploit trust. The prosecution built their case methodically. They presented the toxicology evidence showing Araya had been drugged with Marcus's prescription sedatives. They showed the timeline of phone calls and messages. They brought in Dr. Khalil, who explained in clinical detail how Araya had died, how asphyxiation left specific markers, how her injuries were consistent with being held down and smothered or strangled. They called Grace Reyes as a witness. She flew from London, took the stand, and described her relationship with Marcus. The lies, the discovery of his deception, the fear she'd felt when confronting him. She said she tried to warn other women, including Araya. She'd found Araya's social media 2 months before the wedding, sent a private message explaining who Marcus was. Araya had never responded, but Grace had seen that the message had been read. That revelation broke something in Araya's sister. She stood up in the gallery, shouting in Thai, asking why Grace hadn't tried harder, why she'd sent just one message and then walked away. Security moved to escort her out, but Grace asked the judge for permission to respond. Permission granted, she turned to face Araya's sister directly. Grace said she'd sent that message knowing it might be ignored, knowing Araya might think she was crazy or jealous or lying. She said she'd agonized over whether to do more, to contact Araya's family or the police, but there was no crime in being a liar and a manipulator. She'd done what she could with the information she had. She said she was sorry. She said she thought about Araya every day. She said she wished she'd been braver. The courtroom was silent. Araya's sister sat down. The trial continued. The defense argued that the recording was inadmissible under Dubai law because Araya had recorded Marcus without his knowledge or consent. The judge ruled that, while the recording might not have been admissible in a civil case, in criminal proceedings involving a death, the standards were different. The recording would be allowed, though the jury would be instructed to consider its limitations. The defense presented their version. Marcus took the stand, composed and remorseful. He admitted he hadn't been entirely honest about his past relationships. He admitted his business had struggled, that he'd exaggerated his success. He admitted he'd been attracted to Araya, partly because of her connections in Asian hospitality markets. But he insisted he loved her. He insisted they'd had a real relationship, real feelings. He described the wedding night as a tragedy born from misunderstanding and panic. Araya had confronted him with accusations based on internet research and the words of a vengeful ex-girlfriend. He'd tried to explain, but she'd become increasingly agitated. He'd given her a sedative earlier in the evening, yes, but only because she'd seemed anxious and she'd agreed to take it. When she started accusing him of using her, of lying, he'd tried to calm her down. She'd fought him, scratched at him. In the struggle, trying to restrain her, something had gone wrong. She'd stopped breathing. He'd panicked. He'd tried CPR. He'd called for help. He'd made mistakes. He admitted that, but he hadn't murdered his wife. The prosecutor cross-examined him for 6 hours over 2 days, pressed him on every inconsistency, every lie he'd told Araya, told Grace, told the other women whose stories had emerged during the investigation. Asked him why, if Araya had agreed to take the sedative, he hadn't mentioned it to police or paramedics. Asked him why he'd called his friend David during the wedding reception to discuss how to handle Araya's suspicions if he'd had nothing to hide. Asked him to explain the 11 minutes of silence on the recording after Araya stopped speaking, the sound of him pacing and muttering and planning what to do with her body. Marcus had answers for everything. They were thin answers, contradictory answers, but he delivered them with the same calm charm he'd used to seduce Araya. The prosecutor asked him if he felt any remorse. He said he felt devastated. He'd lost his wife. Nothing could bring her back. He had to live with that forever. The prosecutor asked if he'd ever loved Araya at all. Marcus paused, then said yes, in his own way he had. The jury deliberated for 3 days. In Dubai's legal system, which blended civil law with Sharia principles, the process was complex. Foreign nationals involved in capital cases received certain protections, but the evidence standards were high. The prosecution needed to prove intent, not just opportunity. The recording was the key. Legal experts debated its weight. Some argued it proved premeditation and murder. Others claimed it proved only that a confrontation had occurred, that violence had erupted, but not that Marcus had planned to kill his wife. On the 3rd day, the jury returned. Guilty of murder in the 1st degree, Marcus showed no reaction. His lawyer immediately filed appeals, citing procedural irregularities and evidentiary concerns. But the verdict stood. Sentencing came 2 weeks later, 25 years in a Dubai prison, eligible for parole after 17. Araya's mother and sister were in the courtroom for the sentencing. When the judge read the term, 25 years, the mother closed her eyes and whispered something in Thai. A prayer, perhaps. Or a goodbye. The sister stared at Marcus until he was led away in handcuffs. He never looked back at them. After the trial, Inspector Rashid helped arrange for Araya's body to be released for transport back to Thailand. The process had taken months, complicated by the investigation and trial. Araya's family held a Buddhist ceremony in Chiang Mai, at a temple near the Ping River where Araya had grown up. Hundreds of people attended, former colleagues from the resort, friends from her neighborhood, strangers who'd followed the case and wanted to pay respects. Grace Reyes flew to Thailand for the ceremony. She stood in the back, uncertain if she'd be welcome. Araya's sister saw her, walked over, and without speaking, took her hand. They stood together while monks chanted and incense smoke drifted toward the ceiling. Afterward, Grace asked if there was anything she could do. The sister said, "Tell people. Tell them what happened. Make sure Araya is not just a victim in a news story. Make sure people remember she was smart and brave and tried to protect herself." Grace promised she would. In the months that followed, the case became a catalyst. Women's advocacy groups in Southeast Asia used Araya's story to push for stronger protections against transnational romance fraud. Several countries updated their immigration screening processes for foreign spouses. Grace started a nonprofit that verified background information for women in international relationships, offering free services and connecting people with investigators when something seemed wrong. 3 more women came forward with stories about Marcus Pemberton, relationships that had ended before reaching Araya's tragic conclusion, but which followed the same pattern. Promises, lies. One woman said she'd almost married him, had caught him in a lie 2 weeks before their wedding, and had called it off despite his tears and apologies. She said she'd thought about Araya constantly, knowing it could have been her on that hotel floor. Inspector Rashid kept the case file on her desk for months after the trial ended. She'd worked hundreds of cases, but something about Araya stayed with her. Maybe it was the recording, hearing a woman's last moments, knowing she'd been trying so hard to save herself. Maybe it was the wedding photos, Araya in her ivory dress, smiling with hope that would be dead within hours. Maybe it was the simplicity of the lesson everyone wanted to draw from the tragedy, that women should be more careful, should trust their instincts, should see the warning signs, as if the responsibility for male violence rested with women's vigilance rather than men's choices. She thought about all the women who ended up in situations like Araya's, not just dramatic murders in luxury hotels, but quiet disappearances into abusive marriages, financial ruin, psychological destruction. Women who ignored red flags because they'd been taught that love required sacrifice, that suspicion was cynical, that second chances were noble. Women who built cases against their own instincts, who documented their doubts but moved forward anyway because turning back felt like failure. Araya had been smarter than most. She'd investigated, she'd gathered evidence, she'd tried to confront the truth. And still it hadn't been enough, because intelligence couldn't protect you from someone willing to kill rather than be exposed. One afternoon, 6 months after the trial, Rashid received an email from Araya's sister. She was back in university, studying law now instead of literature. She said she wanted to work in international justice, to help women like her sister. She thanked Rashid for everything, for believing Araya, for fighting for her when she couldn't fight for herself. She said she still listened to her sister's voice sometimes, recordings from before, just to remember what she sounded like when she was happy. Rashid wrote back saying she was proud of her, that Araya would be proud too. She didn't say what she was thinking, which was that no amount of justice or advocacy or legal reform would bring Araya back, would give her the life she'd been building, would let her mother hold her again or her sister call her for advice. The work mattered, but the loss was permanent. She opened Araya's case file one more time. Inside was a photograph from the wedding, one the hotel photographer had taken during the reception. Araya and Marcus dancing, her head on his shoulder, his arms around her waist. To anyone looking, they appeared happy, in love, beginning a life together. But if you looked closely at Araya's face, at the angle of the camera that caught her expression in profile, you could see something else. Not happiness, not love, just a woman trying to survive until she could figure out the truth. Rashid closed the file. Inspector Nazreen Rashid had learned long ago that some cases stayed with you not because they were the most violent or the most complex, but because they revealed something essential about the world. Araya Fonsri's case revealed that courage without caution was just another form of hope. That hope, in the wrong hands, could be weaponized. That a woman could be brilliant and careful and still end up dead on a marble floor because she believed that truth mattered more than safety. Years would pass. Marcus would age in prison, filing appeals that went nowhere, giving interviews where he maintained his innocence, developing a small following of people who believed he'd been wrongly convicted. Grace's nonprofit would help hundreds of women avoid similar fates. Araya's sister would graduate, become a lawyer, dedicate her career to fighting for justice in cases like her sister's. But none of it would change what happened in that hotel Sweden. None of it would give Araya back the morning she didn't get to see, the life she didn't get to live, the choices she didn't get to make. The lesson everyone wanted to draw was about warning signs and trust and intuition. But the real lesson was simpler and harder. That some men saw women as obstacles to be removed when they became inconvenient. That marriage could be a trap as easily as a partnership. That the moment a woman stopped being useful was the moment she became disposable. Araya Fonsri had understood that in the end. She'd recorded her final conversation knowing it might be her only weapon. She'd left evidence because she'd known she might not survive to testify. She'd been 22 years old, and she'd been smart enough to see the danger and brave enough to face it, and it still hadn't saved her. Her voice remained, though, stored in a police evidence locker, preserved in court transcripts, replayed in training sessions for investigators learning to recognize domestic violence, a ghost in the machine, still fighting, still demanding to be heard, and perhaps that was all anyone could ask for. To leave behind proof, to make the violence visible, to refuse to disappear quietly into someone else's lie. The Dubai skyline glittered in the distance beyond Inspector Rashid's window, glass towers catching the light, beautiful and impersonal and unchanged. Somewhere in the city, tourists were checking into luxury hotels, celebrating weddings, beginning honeymoons. Life continued. It always did. But in a case file on a detective's desk, in a recording that would never be deleted, in the memory of everyone who'd known her name, Araya Fonsri remained. Not just a victim, not just a cautionary tale, but a woman who'd tried to save herself and, failing that, had made sure her killer couldn't hide behind charm and champagne and the assumption that dead women tell no tales. She had told hers. And it had been enough to put Marcus Pemberton exactly where he belonged. Locked away from the world he'd tried to manipulate, unable to hurt anyone else. It wasn't resurrection. It wasn't justice in any complete sense. But it was something. A voice that refused to be silenced. The truth that refused to stay buried. And in the end, perhaps that was the only victory available. Not safety, not prevention. Just the stubborn insistence that what happened mattered, that she had mattered, and that the world would have to acknowledge both.